Your alternative talk radio contact. The Planet. KGRAradio.com.
With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Welcome to another episode of Into the Fray, leering at you from the woodline. Visit the mothership at intothefrayradio.com. There you can find all the episodes, the blog posts, ITF gear, and sign up for the free guest newsletter. The weekly show is, of course, always free and available in all podcatchers, but if you'd like to support the show, and why wouldn't you, go to the website and click Become an Insider, which in turn gets you extra content each and every month. And by the way, if you would be so kind as to leave a rating and review in your listening platform of choice, Cosmic Karma shall be yours. Be part of the discussion by joining the interactive ITF Facebook group, follow on Twitter at ITF_radio, and Instagram. If you have an experience that you'd like to share, email Shannon at intothefrayradio.com or call the hotline anytime at 844-866-3366. Thanks so much for listening. Now, if you would be so kind, buckle up your safety belts. Put that tray table in the upright position. Liftoff is upon us.
Hello, everyone. As Clint has just said, welcome to another episode of Into the Fray. And if you could not recognize by his voice, that is indeed Clint Granberry of OK Talk Show. You can find them on the interwebs and, of course, via podcast. Just look up OK Talk. Before we get to my interview with Bear, a quick reminder that you can sign up right now for Insider for 99 cents for the first month. Click Become an Insider, add the monthly subscription to your cart, and prior to checkout, simply put in the coupon code INSIDER. This will make the first month 99 cents and $4.99 thereafter. And I, of course, have to say to all of the phrases out there, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, watch out for Krampus. Yeah, just send me over a request. Okay. Yeah, so Pam's, I think that out of all the interviews that I've done, I think that Pam so far has been the one that I've received the most feedback from, correspondence from people going, mostly, oh my God, that reminds me of this, or oh, I've heard that, or here's what I think about. I've got a lot of people talking about what happened to her and her friend in Ireland with that whole snake with the light and the, being dizzy, and I think she's been the one, and that subject has been the one that's I've gotten the most feedback out of anything.
Well, it's an interesting subject, and I hadn't really, I have that same thing, and I was like, oh, well, this is like a new cryptid or whatever, and then, for me at least. But then I was like, well, yeah, because I've always been interested. I grew up on stories. And I grew up in West Virginia in the Appalachian Mountains, and I listened to those old storytellers tell all their stories and stuff. And particularly was always interested in fairy stories, and and not the Tinkerbell, but kind of what Pam's talking about with that there's a very dark side to that folklore. And I have books and books and books on Irish fairy tales.
Do you?
That part of it was really neat. And listening to her talk about the things that she's found, and then already knowing some of it, and then learning some of it, or getting a different kind of perspective on some of it.
Right.
But But like I said in the email, that one experience that I had, and then there's a lot of things that happened there that I didn't include because I don't like I don't know. I don't like to sit in front of my computer forever typing.
Before we jump in here, is it okay to use your first name, or do you want a pseudonym or anything like that?
Well, so I go by Sean or Bear, and I don't care which one you use. Probably
Okay.
be better to use Bear since that's my username
Okay.
on the. I prefer Bear actually, but usually I just tell
Okay.
people just pick which one you like. And,
whatever you'd prefer is the one I'd rather go with. And what about, is it okay to tell everyone what state we're going to be talking about, like where these happened, or did you want to keep that private?
No, that's fine. I don't care about that.
Okay.
I'm a very frank person, and all of my friends know I'm crazy. Like, I'm not one of, like, I saw a Sasquatch, and I'm not
Right.
one of those people that was like, and everyone just laughed at me. I, like, went and told people, and people were like, well, if you say you saw it, I believe you, because that's just how I am.
Right.
And I don't care if people think I'm crazy. My girlfriend knows I'm nuts, and it's,
Amen, right? That's
It's
how
all
I
good.
feel. I'm like, I wear the freak badge out on my shoulder, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, well, that way it's not a surprise for anyone,
Right. They're like, I'm sorry, did you
Convincing people that you're normal for 3
Yeah.
years and then going, oh, and by the way,
Yeah.
They're
Like, well, you know the Fae folk, right? And they're like, the what? The whaty what? They're like, yeah, and the Sasquatch and the this and the that, and I love that stuff. And they're like, who are you? Before we jump
Yep.
into the email that you sent me, it got prompted because, and we were chatting a little bit already about this, but Pam's encounters, and a whole nother episode got put up for Insiders, I think it was just over 2 hours or something, where she talked about more encounters. But I got so much correspondence from Pam's Fae encounters, and as you were saying, these aren't nice Tinkerbells flitting around, spreading seeds in the garden and helping you out around the house. These are quite dark entities, and they can be. And the reason that you wrote me is because when Pam was talking about her grandmother, and I don't remember what she was carrying. Maybe you do. Maybe you have listened to it in the recent past. But her grandmother was carrying something out in a pasture while there was a lot of cows around, and she actually saw
moving the cows from them.
Okay, is that what? Okay, I can remember she was actually carrying
She
something.
was moving them, and there was an area that she had to move them through that always made her nervous.
Creeped her out.
She
Yeah.
didn't have any choice.
Yeah.
She might have been carrying something, but I just remember that she was moving cows.
Yeah, I remember the cows being there, and she actually, I think she saw an entity, and it asked her if her load was heavy, basically saying, would you like help with that? And it's one of those things where in Fae folklore, if you accept the help, you might be in a heck of a lot of trouble. So that's the thing that kind of prompted you to go, oh my gosh, I kind of had something extremely similar happen to me. But before we get there was a portion of your email where you said that you had been told not to mess with them. Did that come from someone in your family, or just from your readings from all the books that you have?
So when I was growing up, I never thought that things were just, there's too many similar stories from too many different areas of the world, people that never talk to each other, talking about various things. And so I always thought there must be something more to it than just that this is how you tell stories and whatever. So I asked a lot when I was a kid of, what do you do? And in particular, I think in regards to like spirits and ghosts and stuff was where I got the advice that if, that you just say, I'm not going to harm you, and I don't want to be interfered with. I grew up around a lot of spiritualists and energy workers and stuff. My adopted parents were very pagan and very into that, and so there were people who were always very open and willing to talk about anything kind of supernatural, and that was just the general thing, that if anything makes you nervous, you just say, I'm not going to mess with you. You're not going to mess with me. And you go about your life, which is kind of similar to what Pam said about, like, you just ignore them.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a good idea. A lot of people sort of, when they get these weird heebie-jeebie feelings or whatever, they start looking for it, and they're like, oh, this really cool thing's happening. It's not always. Sometimes I guess it is. It's not always a good idea to look for things.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't remember. I think it was probably my mom in particular who said, if you ever encounter anything that scares you and you don't understand it, you just put that thought out there that I'm not going to follow you.
No, I think that completely answers it. I was just wondering because that was something that stuck out in the email, and I just wondered if that was something that came from a family member that had maybe a bad experience in the past. Maybe not specifically with the Fae, but that stood out to me. So thank you for answering that. So let's go to this property in Virginia, and you said this was several years ago. So however you want to kind of set that up for us, go right ahead, Bear.
Yeah, well, I made some notes, so I'm going to work off of my notes because otherwise I'll forget something. Because there's a lot of things that sort of. Anyway, we were moving to this place, and the property was owned by my now ex-wife's parents, and it was vacant. It was about 40 acres of mostly wooded property, and there was a house sort of in the middle of it, and they had built a shop building out there, but no one lived there. We were going to move there and live in a single wide trailer while we built a house on that property. They were going to give us a piece of it. That ended up never happening, but we did start that process. So we had the trailer there, and we would go over and work on it because it needed fixing up, which meant I would go over and work on it. And the more time I spent there, the sort of weirder it would be. Like, I remember talking to my ex-wife about it, and that was when it got really interesting because she had the same. Anytime that she was there by herself, she had that feeling that something was watching her, or feeling that something was just not right. And if you walked anywhere, if you went for a walk in the woods, you could hear something pacing you, almost always. And it was doing that, as you walk, if you stopped, it would stop. And if you started, it would start. And I don't know what to think of that, but we both definitely experienced it a lot. And we would talk about it. And let's see. Oh, so there was a graveyard. And what ended up happening was that we bought a house, and the property for our house backed up to this property. And the graveyard on that property was actually right behind the house that we bought. But we didn't know that at the time. And we would go try to look for this little graveyard that was there. And I hate to bring the graveyard up because I don't want to say graveyard and have everyone go, ooh, graveyard.
Right.
Because I don't know that it is just, it's part of it, so I have to bring it up. And I don't want to mystify the whole story just by adding a graveyard.
Right.
But I remember one day that me and her stepfather and her stepbrothers were over there, and we went to look for the graveyard. We were like, let's go find, where this thing is. And everyone had seen it before, but no one could remember exactly where it was. So we were all sort of walking through the woods, and she was walking with her stepfather, and he said, I think it's over this way, and he walked away from her, and she said as soon as he got out of sight, she found the graveyard. She looked up, and there it was. And so she started yelling for him, and he never heard her. And she could hear him walking through the woods, and he never heard her yelling. And that was really significant to her. She said, I don't understand how he didn't hear me. I could still hear him. So weird things like that. Not being able to find the graveyard was weird. You could get lost over there. I always call it being pixie-led. Pam called it being stray. But I always thought of it as pixie-led. When you should know where you are, you've been there before, and you just don't know where you are, That would happen a lot.
Sean, what would happen once she was calling for, this was her stepfather, you said, I mean, did you guys talk about that later? And she's like, didn't you hear me calling for you? I mean, was that ever spoken about?
No. Well, so everyone showed up sort of back at the central clearing area where the house was. And she said, how come you didn't come back when I called for you? And he said, I never heard you. And she said, I could still hear you walking through the woods, and I was yelling for you. And it was just like, huh, that's odd. Because everything is always, huh, that's odd, right?
Right.
Until, like, you sit down and start connecting all the dots. And then you're like, that's a little more odd than a bunch of just coincidences. Because it's not like I've lived somewhere else where all this stuff happened there, too. You know?
Right.
I've had other experiences in places. But you know what I mean? It's not like it's common for you to be in the woods and hear someone walking and yell for them and they can't hear you. That only happened to this one. So it's just a lot of weird little things like that. And whether it's all necessarily related to the topic of the Fae or anything, I don't know. But it's all going to get sort of honorable mention.
No, absolutely, and it should. And I don't know if you heard the very last episode, but I was talking to Clint and Jared about this, that I had an email, and I will hopefully be getting him on, where he had the exact same experience. But he was hollering to numerous people that were, I mean, I think he could actually physically see them, and they were not reacting in the least to him kind of hollering and feeling like he was in a kind of a weird spot. So I don't know.
Is that the Compass episode?
Yeah. I barely mentioned the email, but it's the same idea that, and I can't help but, like you said, the honorable mention thing. I can't help but always honorably mention maybe what's going on in some of these missing 411 cases. So I don't know what to make of that, but there you go.
Yeah, I'll listen to that. That sounds neat. So anyway, so that was all. There was one more thing about the graveyard, which was after we moved in. I went back there for something, and I walked out the back of my property into the woods, and then walked across. And I knew the way pretty good by then. And I heard something like, it was like a yelling or a screaming, but it wasn't like a bobcat. Like, we had bobcats, and I know what they are, you know. It sounded like my son, but not exactly, but kind of. So my son had a speech problem, and he was maybe like 4 or 5 at the time. And so he would make this squawking noise, especially if he was yelling for someone. He wouldn't say like, hello. He would just sort of like do this like, wah, you know, because he couldn't talk very well. And it kind of sounded like him. And I would have ignored it, except for I thought, you know, well, maybe that's my son. And he was asleep in the house when I left. I thought, you know, maybe he woke up and he saw me walking out the back, and he's come to find me, and now he's in the woods. Like, where am I? So I started walking towards the noise, and I ended up in the graveyard that no one could ever find. And the noise stopped. Like, when I got within sight of the graveyard, I couldn't hear it anymore.
And how many times did you hear the squawk? I mean, by the time you first heard it to the time it stopped, how many times did it go off?
At least a dozen. I mean, it was like kind of this continual, like if you were walking through the woods and you were trying to find someone, and you said, hello, and, you know, or hey, or whatever, you know, you would say it every so often as you continued your journey, except that it wasn't moving. And it took me right back to the graveyard, and I was like, oh, crap, the graveyard.
You're like, this again.
And I went home, and I looked at my son's room, and he was still asleep. It was not him, whatever it was.
But you thought for sure,
and, you know,
I mean, you were pretty darn sure that was your son, and that is why you made the decision to go towards the sound, obviously. You were like, oh, well, he's awake and in the woods, and
well,
I
thought there was a good chance it was him, because it didn't sound like any animal. I've spent my whole life in the woods, you know. And I thought, well, you know, that sounds enough like him that I better go check that out.
So it was something messed up mimicking him. Ugh.
Yeah. The other thing was that it was too loud to be him.
Okay.
From where I was, from the distance away, I could tell it was. That was the only thing, actually, I think, that I remember that I thought, that sounds like him, but it's a little too loud. You know, like, I think if he was where that sound's coming from and he was yelling, I wouldn't hear it. You know, I might hear it, but not like this. Right. You know? But it wouldn't have been anything out of character for him to do that. He would have totally just walked off into the woods and started yelling for me. So, you know, I had to check it out, but he was asleep still.
Can we expand on the graveyard a little? Is there actually headstones and tombstones with names and such on it? Is it an old graveyard?
Yeah, there were 3 or 4 of them. I can't remember. And there were supposed to be 3 big pine trees. One of the deeded in things was that you couldn't cut down the pine trees around the graveyard. One of the pine trees had died. The access to the graveyard, so the house that I bought when you went back into the woods, it was fenced, and there was like a little walk-through gate there in this kind of like what looked like an old, maybe like logging trail kind of thing. And that trail went straight to the graveyard, and the graveyard was so close behind that house that you could almost hit it with a rock from the property line.
Mm-hmm.
So it got to where, like, I knew exactly where it was, you know. There was a path from the other property that went to the graveyard, but you couldn't really see it. Like, you could tell at one time it had been cleared, you know, but it was all overgrown. We'd ride our horses through there sometimes just because it was easier to push through that stuff because it was younger.
All right.
But otherwise, like, once I got the lay of that property, and especially that side, because that was my side of the property, I had it pretty good. There was only 2 times after I really understood it, and one time was in the snow, so I didn't blame, you know. When you walk through woods, even woods you know in the snow, they look different, and you can
Right.
end up going further than you meant to or whatever, and that's what had happened. And then there was one other time where I was just sort of moving along, and I got to this point, and I thought, I didn't cross the 4-wheeler trail I should have crossed, and where in the world am I? And somehow I passed it, but I would have had to cross right over it and not see it. I don't know how that happened.
Mm.
But, you know, maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm not as good at walking in the woods as I like to think I am. So what we did to go into the story that I sent you was that we stored all of our stuff in that shop over there, and we bought the house. But there was a 3-month period where we were staying with her parents because we hadn't closed on a new house yet, but we'd sold our old one, and all of our stuff was in that shop. And so after we moved in, we would just go over there and get it all. You know, like as sort of like we needed something, like go over there and get the couch, you know. And so one night, 4 or 5 months maybe after we moved in, I can't remember, I went over there for something, and I backed the truck up to the shop. But you could tell when you pulled onto the property that it wasn't right. It was really weird. I took a coworker over there one time, just in the afternoon, and as soon as we crossed the property line, he said, I have a really spooky feeling. And I said, I know, watch this. And I put the truck in reverse and back across the property line. He said, it went away. I said, yeah, this is the property line. As soon as you pull onto this property, it starts freaking you out.
And you
like,
hadn't mentioned prior anything to him. I mean, you just took him out there.
I didn't tell him anything about it because I'm not, you know, like going to, I'm about to creep you out. No, it's just like, you know, we were going back to my place, and I said, you know, I'm going to swing down here and pick something up. And he was riding, you know, his car was at my house. He brought it up. And I was like, yeah, check it out. And I did it a couple of times. And he's like, that is the creepiest thing in the world. You can totally feel when you cross onto those properties.
Was that interesting for you to have someone on the outside to confirm that, or did it not surprise you in the least?
Both. It didn't surprise me because I thought it was creepy, you know. But yes, it was interesting. I think people sort of have different levels of sensitivity to that kind of thing. And I think of myself as being fairly sensitive to it. So, you know, maybe just sort of he was too.
Had there been other people out there that had never mentioned it before?
Well, I don't think that it's the kind of thing that a lot of people really bring up. Because so the other thing is that, you know, like I don't talk about this particular experience a lot because it really just sounds like I was letting my mind get the better of me, which is not true. I'm not afraid of the dark, and I'm not afraid of the woods. In fact, I walked off of a mountain one time for 2 miles by myself in dark, so dark that you literally could not see your hand in front of your face. I tried and never once was afraid. I'm not scared. So when I get a really weird feeling about something, I pay attention to it. You know, growing up running around in the woods in West Virginia, that was one of the other things that we were told was if you ever feel like you shouldn't be somewhere in the woods, you should leave.
Yeah. And
that happened a lot. And there were places that like you would be fine one day and another day you just start getting creeped out, or I get creeped out of my house sometimes. You know, we had all these big windows and I feel like my house was watching me. So I always pay attention to that. So I always pay attention to this place. And I remember when I had to go over there that night, I didn't like the idea. I thought, I don't want to go over there in the dark.
Right.
but I really wanted to get whatever it was. And so anyway, okay. Do you have any more questions?
No, go ahead. Sorry. I interrupt sometimes. I apologize.
No, I don't mind, but I will get totally sidetracked and tell you my life story, and we'll never.
you know that's
know.
what the show is built on, is sidetracked. I do it all the time, so no worries. So yeah, if I ask something and we go on a tangent, you don't have to apologize at all. It's my fault anyway.
Okay. Just remind me where I stopped usually. So anyway, so I went over there, and I didn't like it, and I got the heebie-jeebies up my neck kind of thing, and I did it anyway because I'm a grown man, and and it got worse, and then I don't really know how to explain it because I've never seen, like what Pam was saying, she sees these things. I've never seen anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I do see auras, and I can turn that on and off.
Mm.
But I've never seen any freaking horned fairies running around in the woods. I've always wanted to believe that they were there, but but I felt like something was right behind me, and I actually felt it approach, and it came around like the passenger side of my truck and came up right behind me, and I didn't turn around because I didn't want to see it, and I didn't want to not see it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I didn't really want confirmation one way or the other. And I heard this voice in my head. I'm pretty sure it was just in my head. And it was like, like sometimes maybe you hear your mother's voice.
Yeah. And
you'll hear her saying, do unto others, or whatever your mother's phrase was. It was like that, but I'd never heard this voice before. And it was really like invasive. And it said, do you want help with that? And I thought back as strongly as I could, no, because I knew that I could say yes, and I think that if I'd said yes, whatever it was would have helped me. But I also had the feeling that would have been the worst thing I could have ever done. That you're signing a contract doing that, because then I would be in its debt. And what in the world does something like that want from me that I really want to give it? Like, you can't turn around and say, here's $20 for your effort.
Right.
I
mean, your soul, of course, Bear. What else would it want? What did the voice sound like? I mean, what did it literally sound like, if you can even remember such a thing?
It was like, it was deep and it was smooth. It was, I don't know how to explain it.
Was it almost like sing-song? Like smooth, like a sing-song type of phrase?
No, but you know how some people cut their words really short, and then some people speak in a lyrical might be the word, but not singing.
Okay.
Just, I had a friend who lived nearby down there, and he was a black man, and he had that kind of voice. He had this really deep, smooth, very pleasant to listen to kind of voice.
Right, like syrupy. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, syrupy is exactly right. It was kind of like that. And I said, no, I don't, I just thought it was over and over. No, I'm fine. I'm not going to mess with you. You're not going to mess with me. And as I said in the email, I didn't move for a few minutes because I didn't want to back up, because I could feel that it was right behind me. That, I think in the email I said if you were sitting at your desk and someone came into the room and stood right behind you, you would know it.
Now, you're still inside the truck at this point, or are you standing just outside?
No, I was out of the truck. I was at the back of the tailgate.
Okay.
Getting the stuff to load.
You were literally trying to load whatever you went over there for into the truck. Okay.
Yeah. And it kind of backed off of me, and it backed away to sort of my left. Or that's what I felt like whatever the presence was, it moved back. And I finished loading the truck, and I got in, and I left quickly, and I was shaking. And I was shaking so bad that when I got home, I didn't even, normally what I would do would be maybe get home and back in and then put the tailgate down and start unloading the stuff and ask my wife where she wants me to put it, kind of thing. And I didn't do any of that. I backed in and I got out of the truck and I went straight in the house and sat down on the couch. It's so shaken up. And we had a friend over that night, and she and my wife came in, and They were like, "Is everything okay?" And I was like, "I just need a minute." And then I told them the story, and I said, "I'm never, ever going over there after dark again. I don't care what happens. I will never go over there again." I was that scared. And it's hard to feel that way and not have anything tangible, like when you get reports of sightings of things, like when someone sees Bigfoot, they say, "I don't care what y'all say, I know what I saw," but I can't do that. All I can say is, I don't care what you say, I know what I felt, or I know what I think was going on, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, you
It's
said
not something that I can.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Keep going.
So the fortunate thing is that my wife already knew that place was pretty creepy, and she's pretty open-minded about a lot of things anyway, so she didn't give me any grief over it. And I did go back over there at night again, but it was a long time before I did. And some things happened and things changed. One thing that happened was there was a vineyard next door, and they cleared out. So there is, if you walk to the back of my property, what they cleared out, you could see. They actually, when they were burning, they set my property on fire. When they piled all the trees up and they were burning the brush, and the fire jumped. So that was all open, and then so this was an interesting thing. That this is another thing that she and I discussed about that property. We had dairy goats, and I did most of the milking. And what I would do is I would milk the goats and I'd bring it up to the house and I would strain the milk into like quart jars, right? Any amount of milk that I had left over after my last quart jar, I would put outside in a bowl, and I would put it out for the fairies. That was my, so it was really cool when that came up in the other, the other interview with Pam, because having read all of the Irish stories that I did, that was one way to keep them from messing with you in all of those stories, was to put a bowl of milk out. And then I always knew that it was probably my cats that drank it, right?
Right. But it would be gone.
But but the thing that was interesting was, like, if my goats were on a declining trend, like they produce the most milk 2 weeks after freshening or having their babies. That's sort of when they're at their peak, and then they decline slowly, and different goats sort of do it at different times. As soon as I'd start putting milk out, like I'd pull the babies and start milking and putting the milk out, they'd stop declining in their milk production. And they would go, almost forever. They would just go like that. It was weird. And the other thing that happened was we went one day, we said, let's take the goats for a walk, because they're all really friendly. And we opened up the back and we walked down to the woods on that property, and we walked all over the place back there. And we felt so happy and peaceful and welcome. And it was like I wanted nothing in the world more than to live there. And I had said, I don't see how anybody ever lives here, but I was like, I want to live here. This place is really, really welcoming and really gracious. And it was the weirdest thing. And she felt it too. And she's like, it's so nice. Like when you come back here with the goats, and I thought that was really weird, because usually when you're walking around back there, you feel like something's stalking you and something's watching you and something doesn't.
She would call it getting the stray put on you, like a glamour, right?
Maybe. So what I think happened, this would be total speculation on my part. What I think may be the case is that when we were planning to move to that property, we were getting creeped out, right? And we always felt sort of on edge. And when we built a life sort of next door and stopped interfering with that property as much, and then we started doing the homesteading thing, and we were just like leaving milk out or whatever, but we would go back there with the goats. I think that it was more like, oh, well, this is okay. If you want to, if you want to raise goats and give us milk, come on in.
Right.
If you want to bulldoze the trees and build a house, we don't want you here. But then after they cleared that vineyard area, the whole property was different. It was just it was sort of like you didn't feel one way or the other. You know, it was just like land. It was just like whatever was there, I think, just kind of left, and it was weird.
That's interesting.
And people hunted back there, because I hunted back there, but a lot of the neighbors would hunt back there too. They weren't supposed to, but they'd do it. But no one else ever said anything about it. It was just me and my wife and my friend that day that would always feel creeped out. And my kids never said anything. But if you went back there with or like when we would horseback ride, it was okay too. If you went back there with animals, it was okay. But if you went back there any other time, it was just weird.
Yeah.
And it was weird, like from the beginning. It was just weird.
Yeah, the old nature spirits, it sounds like, huh? Like you said, you go back there with animals, or obviously you're treating animals with kindness, and they can, quote unquote, see that, however that works. But the second you're building or chopping or burning, they have serious problems with it. My
ex-wife said that she thought they were land wraiths. And that they were tied to that land. And she said, if you think about the people that would have first come through and settled this land and cut down all these trees by hand and pulled up all these rocks by hand, because there were cairns of rocks back there where someone had cleared it at one time for pasture. She said they probably understand what we're doing now, and they're more okay with it. That was her take on it.
Bear, how large was the vineyard? How many vines were in that vineyard?
I don't know. There's a lot.
It was quite a lot then.
It's a much bigger vineyard now. And I'll plug it actually. It's Cooper Vineyards. It is probably one of the best vineyards in the area. They're one of the few places that I go and enjoy just about everything that they have on their list. They had just a small, like they had this little tasting room, and then they had this field out back that had all these grapes in it. And then they cleared that land and they built another tasting room, and then they planted all that in grapes in some kind of order, and they're just booming now. The Virginia wine business has done nothing but got better and better and better over the years. The wines have gotten better, and there's been sort of more demand for them. But one of the things is that with vineyards, they don't necessarily grow all of the grapes that they use to make wine. They'll buy them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because it takes grapes a long time to mature once you plant them. I think it's like 5 years before you really even get a harvest. Or something. I might be wrong about that. Some viniculturist is going to scream at you.
It always happens. I'll get the email going, hey, this is the number you guys couldn't think of.
Right. So it takes a while, and then, depending on how big of a batch you want to make, or how well, like, your particular soil does with any certain type of grape, because different types of grapes grow better at different elevations or in different, whatever. So a lot of times they'll buy them. I know because I've done a lot of hauling grapes for people. And it's just sort of whoever grew too many will sell them to other vineyards. So the amount of grapes grown on a vineyard doesn't necessarily equate to the variety of wines that they have or how much of the wine that they make.
But once those original vines were gone, then the whole era of the property changed, though. So now that Cooper Vineyards is there,
no, the other way, it was woods, right? Mm-hmm. Or is that what you said? So the land was owned by Cooper Vineyards, and it was all woods, and then they cleared it. And so they probably have 40 or 50 acres in, probably not all planted with grapes, but in their, maybe a little less than that, maybe it's 30. I don't know. Someone will look it up on Google.
Yeah, they will. Believe me.
I don't know. I'm not as good with that, but it's a pretty cool place. But it was a big area. You couldn't see anything. Like from my property, when you went to the back, it was just woods as far as you could see on either side. And then they cleared that. There actually one, so my property was 5 acres, and there was like along the road, there were little 5 acre, like as you drive down, like 5 acres, 5 acres, 5 acres, like they just cut it like that. It was like a piano piece. And 5 acres, it doesn't make for a very wide piece of property. They're all these kind of like rectangles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the driveway for that vineyard was just a couple driveways down from mine. And there was only one piece of property between my property and where they cleared. So my property didn't touch theirs, but it wasn't, you could see it. You could throw a rock to it almost, So the property that was owned by the family behind there came along the backside of all the properties on that road over to the property for the vineyard, and then it turned and went down. So that land and that vineyard connect, and then all the ones on the road sort of back up to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess I was just kind of getting at. I wonder what the tie is. It's interesting that your ex-wife called them land wraiths, and then once it seems those vines had been taken out, then the activity calmed down and the strange feelings were kind of gone. And like you said, you didn't have a feeling about it either way. It just makes you wonder, like, where did those vines come from, right? Why were they tied to those things?
Well, they weren't. So you keep saying vines, but they weren't vines. It wasn't like there was a vineyard before. It was just woods, right?
Oh, I got you. Okay, I got you.
All right. So then when you opened up that vineyard, when they opened up that property, it was like all of a sudden I was on, like, instead of like being on the edge of the woods on one side, I was on the edge of the woods on two sides.
Gotcha.
And everything was just kind of more open. And you could see, like, so then when you went back to the house, you could almost, like, you could tell that the woods weren't as deep and dark going that direction as they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know. It ended up that her parents separated and her stepfather was living back there. And I didn't go back there as much because that was, it was where he lived. But I don't know. So I don't know what happens, like, with, if it's an entity that can move around, like if you say, like, it's something that's alive in some form or another, and it doesn't necessarily have to be where it is, and it can just go somewhere else. Maybe that's what happened. I would think, like what she was describing about what she thought with it being land wraiths that are tied to that land, they probably wouldn't leave it, if that's a plausible explanation, if that even exists. I don't know,
Yeah, it sounds like they at least got pacified somehow, right? They weren't doling out
Right.
the negative feelings anymore, at least not while you were still there.
Yeah, either they got pacified or they got over it. I don't
Right.
I don't see my ex-wife's stepfather as being the sort of person to walk softly just because
Mm-hmm.
some other entity, he's
Right.
just bringing spotlights,
Jumping back to that night at the shop, let me ask this question first and I'll go back. Are you sure that you only said, no, thank you, I don't need your help, however that came out, only in your head, or did you say that out loud?
I'm pretty sure I said it only in my head. So what I thought it was spirits. Hearing voices in my head is not a new thing for me, and please don't call the local mental ward. It's not that kind of thing. But, like when I was a little kid, I was adopted at the age of 4, and the first house that we lived in was this really old house in Martinsburg, West Virginia, that I believe was condemned and tore down after we moved out. And there were ghosts in that house, and I know because I saw them. But they didn't creep me out. I thought about them. I remember as a little kid watching them walking around and thinking about them as the people that live here that don't talk to me. and they were just like, like I took them with the same sort of grain of salt that I would take anybody else.
They never interacted with you at all?
No, not there. They didn't. So, growing up in this culture of sort of, in the 80s, New Age faith healing was booming, and we were in the thick of it, and my adopted mother she wanted to be like the town shaman wherever she was, and everyone should come to her and get their flower essences and stuff, I think those people attract a lot of attention from maybe spirits or whatever, but you could talk very frankly about just about anything you wanted, and people wouldn't think you were necessarily losing your marbles.
Right.
But I did have times in my life where I felt like, I guess you call it mind speak. I hate that word. But I felt like that was going on. But how do you differentiate that from maybe I'm just crazy and having thoughts,
Right.
It's odd, but it's also that it can be very pervasive, like if you're daydreaming and you're just kind of talking to yourself, that can be very easily interrupted in your mind. You can just think of something else. But some things that happen that someone might say, well, that's all just in your head. If it's not necessarily all in your head, it can be very invasive and very difficult to ignore,
And so the second part to that question would be, are you also 100% sure, for the most part, at least, that the entity was also not speaking out loud? It did not say out loud, do you want help with that? In its very syrupy voice.
I think not, because but I'm glad that you asked that. So I think that if it had said it out loud, if I'd have heard a voice in my ears, when you're already creeped out, it's sort of the same thing like why I said I didn't turn around and look, because I didn't want to know, I think if I'd have heard a voice in my ears and had that kind of very sudden and very intense confirmation, I would have probably left on foot. I would have just freaked and run.
Maybe screaming at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was already scared. And I'm a big guy, So I think that, all right, so let's, for argument's sake, say that this experience is these faith things that Pam was talking about, and it's very similar to a grandmother's experience and all that, and that's definitely what it is, and that those things can speak audibly. So why didn't it speak audibly to me? Could it be that they can also speak sort of telepathically, and they know at what level they need to address you, because it doesn't benefit the entity at all to scare you to the point that you don't stick around, right?
No, not if it's trying to get its way. And it wants you to say, yes, I would love your help. Thank you so much. And then you're screwed. Right.
And if you lose your mind, that's not going to happen.
No.
So does it then maybe kind of reel that back in and go, well, I'm just going to put this in his head and see what he thinks.
Do you think there was actually a physical entity standing there? What if he would have turned around?
I think if I had turned around, I don't think I would have seen anything, but that does not mean a physical entity was not standing there.
Right.
And I think that kind of for the same reason, because I don't like anything behind me as it is. I don't like human beings behind me. I say that human beings are just about the worst.
Yes.
Yep. I really I'm uncomfortable in the middle of the day in the middle of the park with somebody that I know standing right behind.
Yeah.
So, and I was cornered, so to see with my eyes or hear with my ears anything, God, I can't even imagine. would just been it for me, I think.
Or seeing what Pam has said that she sees just outside her door. I'm like, she's so strong. I don't really know how she processes all of that to be able to just do normal things on a daily basis. It's really incredible. I guess different people can just get used to different things. I have said 1,000 times, there's just certain boundaries that it seems like they should never cross, and that's coming near your home, being inside your home, heaven forbid. These shadow entities
there's
standing
things
over
that
your
come
bed.
into your home.
Yeah.
I mean, there are definitely, if it's not the things that Pam's talking about, there are other things that come into your home.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And that freaks me out. I see them all the time, or I'll hear them or whatever, and that I do not like it.
In your home now?
One time I live in an apartment, and one time in my apartment.
And what would you classify this as?
I don't know, but I saw it with my eyes. I was sitting on the couch, and it was standing in the doorway to my son's room, and I could see the side of its head and its left shoulder, and then sort of its left, like the pectoral area of the chest. On a, I don't know that it was leaned out looking, or if it was just maybe that much narrower at the hips, but nothing below that. I was watching TV and I saw it, and I looked at it and it ducked back, and I beelined for that bedroom. My son wasn't in there; he was in my room sleeping, and he is 5. But they come. I'll let a little more of my crazy out for you. There are things that come after children, and they come at night a lot, and I don't know why they don't. I don't think that they take your children. Like you hear all these missing 411 stories like that.
Mm-hmm.
But there are things that come, and I don't know if they feed off of emotions or whatever. So when I got there, I flipped on the lights, and there was nothing in his room, and I stood in his doorway for like 5 minutes, and just stood there and then said, "This is my space. You stay out of it. You don't come after my kids." They usually leave my kids alone when I figure out that they're there. But they'll come after me too.
But was this a shadow entity bear? Was it head to toe black? What did it look like?
It was white. It was like creamy white. But it wasn't solid. It was, like I don't think I could have shot it with a gun.
Right. Was it skinny, or what kind of build did it have?
Yeah, it was skinny. It wasn't emaciated. It was really tall. It was like 7 feet tall. And thin. Slender would be the word.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard the creamy white description. If anybody else has seen anything like that, please get in contact with me. That is extremely interesting. I've always, the skinny and the really tall, that's what I saw in the woods, but it was all head to toe,
you're setting yourself
deep dark
up to
black.
get a bunch of reports on the rake.
Right? Yeah,
because
that's interesting.
The cryptid of the rake freaks me out. Just the whole idea of that being.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that's not what it was, but that's the closest.
Yep. Yeah, I don't hear a lot of those. It's usually the deep dark black stuff.
My speculation on that, like the shadow people, like what you always talk about, and or creatures like the rake, or possibly creatures like black-eyed children and things like that, is that they're maybe they're all something different. Human beings really like to put things in a box because it makes us feel better.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that they're all maybe part of some similar entity or types of entities. Like I want to call them the jinn because I've heard other people call them that, and it sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
And it would make sense.
Do you think they're
really
from
cool.
the same place?
I mean, it's
All these things are coming from the same place?
I don't know. I'm not a Christian, and I've never been a Christian. And, you know, I always hear on these talk shows or podcasts or whatever, or, you know, in reading things online, everyone wants to go back to the Bible with it, and I just can't do that. I've never read the Bible, and but I do know that there are a lot of things in our world that we just don't understand. And there's flesh and blood animals that we don't really know about, you know. But I think that there's other things. It's always been kind of my problem with people with science too, because I think that as much as, and I don't have anything against science, I love science, but science sets out to prove things, and then as science proves things, it becomes accepted. But I think that people put too much emphasis on that, and it's great that you can accept something that science has proven, but that doesn't mean that just because science hasn't proven it, it doesn't exist, you know. And I think that happens a lot with people. So, you know, one of the great things is people always say, well, there's no proof, you know. I saw a Sasquatch. I talked about Sasquatch for years, and everyone said, there's no proof there's a Sasquatch. So, well, proof there isn't one, you know. And
yeah, it's the null theory, and they can't do
almost
it.
Impossible.
Right. Yep.
So, you know, that's what I'd like to know, and I'd like to be able to say, like, well, yeah, there's the Fae, and there are these things, and we understand them, and we can deal with it because we know it. And then there's the Jinn, and there's this, and then there's the Loch Ness monster, and then whatever, you know. Like, somebody just explain it all and get it out there, and get it all labeled, and, you know, and we'll put it in the books. But that's not how this stuff works. You know, I asked someone who was a friend of the family when I was a kid one time, and I love this quote that he gave me, and I use it a lot. I don't remember why I asked him, but it's probably about something. And I said, do you believe that it was probably like Bigfoot or something, you know. But I was probably 7 or 8 when I did this, and it was just some guy that was like watching us. And I said, you know, do you believe in any of these things? And he said, someone once told me something, and I believe that he is right. And what he said was, if you knew half of what was out there in the night, you wouldn't go out at daytime. And I always remembered that, and I've always believed it. So the whole, you know, looking things up on the internet and listening to podcasts and stuff is a very recent thing for me. I've only been doing it for the last couple of years. But it's interesting to me that there's podcasts like yours, and there's several others, and there's some that sort of specialize. I like yours because you talk about all kinds of different stuff, and some of them like we'll only talk about Dogman or something, you know. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, what you get is all of these people with all of these experiences from all over the place, and they're all saying the same thing. And that kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning of, I always thought that if you get all of these stories, like things that we like to call mythology, when you look at them, every culture has kind of these similar mythologies, and they're all talking about the same thing. But then you say, well, that's just mythology, so that's just what people believed back when they didn't know any better. So it's not like our ancestors were stupid, you know. Like, we always have this idea, you know, people say, well, that was people didn't understand the world then, and they were just making these things up or whatever. And it was, you know, our ancestors were probably as smart as we are in many ways. It's not like when they're saying that these creatures exist in their world, they're just misinterpreting a bear or something, you know. They're not idiots. They're your ancestors. The only reason they didn't have cars is they just hadn't figured that out yet. That doesn't mean that they weren't as smart as the people that invented cars, you know.
I find it interesting that you were adopted, right? So, and you were
Was.
saying that some people just tend to be a little bit more sensitive to that stuff, which I completely agree with. But I find it really interesting that you were adopted into a family that your adopted mother, your mom was a shaman and she's really spiritual, right? I just find that so interesting if you had a double entendre there going on where you were already born with this.
She'd love to hear you say that.
What's that?
I said she'd love to hear you say that. I think that probably everybody is or has the ability to be receptive to more than what the average person perceives in their own right. I don't think it's, one person can see ghosts and one person can't, and that's just because they're, one person's from one culture or whatever. I don't think that's how it works. But I don't know, because I had to learn how to turn a lot of things off because it was too much input. And a lot of the things that I have to work to keep off, a lot of people would have to work to turn on. So Pam talking about seeing auras, I too can see auras, but I don't always see auras, but I always can, And she didn't elaborate on that, but I thought it was interesting that she said it, because it was like, oh, so maybe if I work hard enough, I can see these things she's talking about, But I think that anyone can do that,
But what about your mom? I mean, as far as the story, what happened to you at the shop that night? What would she say about something like that?
It's hard to tell with her. She would believe me. I believe, and she would just say to just always approach anything with peace and let it know that you're not, you don't want. You don't want to hurt it. You don't want it to hurt you. She's very Buddhist, I don't know. Sometimes she doesn't believe me when I say things, which is odd, but I don't know.
Did she tell you
I don't
any
really
stories,
talk to her
or
anymore.
did you? Oh, okay. I mean, yeah, when you were growing up, did you? I mean, was there any rituals or seances or Ouija boards, or what kind of situations were going on in the home? And do you remember ever seeing anything because of some of the healing work that she might have done or things she tapped into?
Yeah. So it was more like a lot of meditating and chanting, and they would always, just when you're in that culture, you're surrounded by other people in that culture.
Right.
So all their friends and stuff. One time when we bought this piece of property in Alderson, West Virginia, and after we bought it, one of their friends came over and was explaining that the underneath of our property was all caves and was all like populated by fairy creatures, and that they were mostly gentle, and that they would sometimes leave us gifts, and we just, they might leave little things, and just to be aware that that's what it was, and it was a gift, And we were, they were big time hippies. We had several huge gardens. We never went to the grocery store, and we built this house, and in the back there was a outhouse. We didn't have indoor plumbing, and I went to the outhouse one day, and there was a crystal, like it wasn't a shelf, but it was like a 2x4, and it was just sitting there, and it was this little crystal, and so I picked it up, and I asked everybody in my family if it was theirs, and nobody had ever seen it before.
Mm.
And it wasn't, it was in a kind of place. I mean, we built the outhouse, and it was in this kind of place where whoever went in next would have found it. It wasn't, like I had to look for it. It was just sitting there. It was like if someone had it in their hand and finished their business and set it down to pull their pants back up or whatever and walked out and forgot it. That's what it looked like to me. But, nobody claimed it. And then I remembered what the person had said, whether that's true or not. I mean, it's also, I guess, possible that one of my parents was creating the magic, So,
right. Is this prior to the incident or after the incident at the shop?
Oh, this is prior. This is when I was a little kid. We don't live in West Virginia anymore.
Okay.
This was when I was little. So there were weird things like that growing up that sometimes just weren't explained and would be chalked up to. Like when we built that house, and they had a meditation room. One of the bedrooms that was a meditation room, and the light was always on, and we'd always turn it off. My mom was so, like, I'm 42, and I still turn lights off everywhere I go. Every room I walk out of, I turn the light off because it's so drilled into me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll turn the light off while you're sitting there reading a book. I just do. And then I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. It's just a reflex,
Right.
And the light was always on in this room. Like we'd turn it off and we'd leave and we'd come back and it would be on,
Mm-hmm.
And it just weird little
Right.
things like that always as a kid would happen. So this acceptance of the more mystical side of the world was just a given as a kid. I had to work hard to get away from it.
Do you still have that crystal? Do you know where it went?
I have a crystal that I think might be it, but I actually can't remember if it's exactly the same one or not.
Yeah,
because I don't remember if it's not that one. I don't remember where I got this one. I just still have it.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I just wonder how much of what your mom was doing kind of rubbed off on you, and maybe kind of put a little spotlight on you to make other things a little more interested in you. If that exacerbated it,
I think so, because when you're in that environment, you're always, it's your life. It's, like I had to meditate every day. I had to do this chakra work every day growing up and open up all of my chakras and then ground and then energy balancing and then crystals and then homeopathic remedies and flower essences and on and on and on. So like whatever the next fad was, we were doing it. And when you're a kid, like when you're a kid and you're a Christian, you go to church, right? So I sat in Buddhist temples and Native American sweat lodges and things like that. And everyone around you is into that kind of stuff. So you're just always
just a norm.
Hearing people's stories about their experiences, right? So I do, because I think I didn't go to school. I was homeschooled. I think that if it had been otherwise, I think that everyone's sort of I think that kids are more perceptive than adults. And I think they just sort of learn to stop being perceptive.
Mm-hmm.
It either you grow out of it or maybe
Would you classify anything that you
that's nothing.
Right. Would you classify anything that you or your mom or your family was doing at that time to be astral travel or remote viewing, anything like that?
Astral projection? Yeah. To this day, I can astral project with the snap of a finger almost. It's amazing. I remember being taught how to do that specifically, and how to do the kind of meditation that requires that. And I used to do it, when I was a younger person. And I remember one time that actually the lady that became my wife, we were dating, and she had a friend over one night, and I knew that he was there, and I knew that he was just a friend, and it was, but I laid down in my bed and kind of did this projection. And the next day I said, look, I'm not going to give you too hard of a time or anything, but I want you to consider what it must be like for me to be by myself and have this person that I'm building a relationship with in her bed with another man laying next to her in the same spot and almost same position that I slept in the night before.
Mm-hmm.
And her eyes got really wide. She said, how do you know that? And I said, I came and looked. And she said, you looked in my window? And I said, no, I looked from here. It freaked her out. Don't do that. If you can astral project and stuff, don't tell people that.
Keep that on the down. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's neat. And sometimes I have to stop myself from doing it.
But you can do that now. You can do that right now at the snap of a finger.
Yeah, I can still. Yeah, especially if I know where I'm going. It's easier if I have a location. I can go.
Can you remote view somewhere you've never been? It just takes more time.
Yes, but it helps if you describe it to me. You know what I mean? So I had a friend at work, and this was, 7 or 8 years ago, and he was having all of this stuff happen in his house, like pictures falling off the wall, but not falling, like coming straight out and then hitting the ground, just weird, And he said, what do I do about all this? I said, well, get a little audio recorder and then say, if you're trying to tell me something, tell me, and set it down and go to bed. And he did, and he didn't get any voices or anything on it, but he got like all these weird knocks and stuff. But then all of this stuff kept happening, and it seemed to be focusing on his daughter. He had a daughter, and his wife had a son from a previous relationship. And I said, okay, I'll come. I said, text me a picture of your front door. And he did. And I went outside that night and did all my meditations and visualized this front door until I felt like I could reach out and touch it. And then I just walked through it because, and I walked all through his house in this state and just put, because if you're dealing with spirits or ghosts or things like that, I think that the more of yourself you put there, you can kind of, their energy, you can move them out of the way. If you put your energy somewhere, you know what I mean? This is what I do in my place. Like I start and I go all the way around and I just say, this is my space. And I don't want that. Like you can leave. and I kind of did that, but, and just sort of looking to see what else I could see there. And then he, I did that, I think 2 or 3 times. On 2 or 3 different nights, and then I don't remember him talking about it anymore. I don't know if it stopped or if he just stopped telling me, because I called him one night and I said, this was like 10 or 10:30 at night, and I said, Mackenzie's not in her bed, you know that, right? And he said, yeah, I know, she's sleeping in her brother's room. And his wife freaked. It's just like, what if he comes in and I'm naked? And I was like, I said, tell her it doesn't,
right.
It doesn't work like that.
Right.
It's not, I can see you, but not, like I can see the energy that's you. I can't really see like.
Right. It's not like looking at the movie screen and seeing everything.
I see you have an outie belly button. It's not like that.
Right. Had you ever been in his house before physically?
No,
and you were able to describe it.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, I knew. Like I could tell. I'd never seen his house, but I knew. Like I could find, like, because when part of the problem with talking about it is it makes me sound like I'm completely insane, but I guess that's okay.
Not
The other
at
thing
all.
is that it's hard to explain. It's you can see the shape of things, and you can, like, you know where the walls are. You don't necessarily know where the couch is. It's sort of like, I guess if the more relevance something has, maybe. So like in a house has been built, and people like intentionally or not, you leave behind your energy sort of everywhere you go. Like the guys that, or I shouldn't just say guys, the people that built your house, the people that built the walls and did the framing, did the drywall, did the painting, all left an imprint of their energy there. That's always there. That will always be there, kind of, to some degree or another, So you might not be able to see a chair because the chair's not really relevant. It's just there, and it's not, no one uses it maybe. But if it's a chair that someone uses every day, you might see that more.
Mm-hmm.
But you can always see like the walls,
Right.
Or the things that the more someone interacts with something, the more I can pick it up on a I guess spectral, I don't know.
No, this is not crazy at all, Bear. In fact, Stranger Things is built on this, like the Montauk Chronicles, right? We know that MK Ultra existed. In fact, there's another new fantastic show on Netflix called Wormwood, which is all about MK Ultra and all of their experiments that were going on. So I don't think that it's crazy at all, especially when the government would spend millions or billions, whatever the number was, on testing people for things like remote viewing.
Right.
That's incredible. Yeah, I could see the wife going, I'm sorry, did he just say he could see that Mackenzie wasn't in her bed? That is incredible, Bear. Should do an experiment with you sometime if you'd ever want to. I don't know if you'd ever feel like doing that. I don't want to make you feel like you're under a microscope like a guinea pig, like I was just talking about MK Ultra, but I just find that kind of stuff fascinating. How long did it take you growing up with your mom and what she did to learn to do this? How long did it take you before you're like, you could snap your finger and just pop, you're doing what you need to do?
Well, so I don't remember who it was. It was somebody in, I think in Lewisburg, West Virginia at the time, who did this, like laid me on a table and did this guided meditation thing,
Mm-hmm.
and pulled me out of my body, and said, it was sort of like, and now visualize yourself rising out of your body and look back and see yourself laying on the table and see, and then after that I could do it. Like once someone showed me how to remove that part of yourself from the confines of your physical form, I could do it. And I can't actually do it just like at the snap of a finger. Sometimes I can, and sometimes it takes a bit of prep work, and then sometimes I can't really do it, or I can't do it well,
Mm-hmm.
And it depends on, really it depends on how I feel, If I go out like in the fall when the leaves are falling and there's a nice breeze, and I go out, in the evening time, maybe as it's getting dark in the woods, I can do all kinds of things. But like right now,
that sounds familiar. Not to interrupt you, but that's exactly what Pam was talking about, and how she feels like that is the most dangerous time for her because she's had so many bad experiences with them, but she makes sure she's inside at that time of the day, right? That's when the veil is the thinnest.
Right. But right now, sitting in my apartment in the middle of the day, I think it would take me at least a half an hour to get into the mindset where I could start to travel,
What about,
it depends.
What about telekinesis? I don't want to, I'm throwing out words that are probably going to make people chuckle, but these are real things. Sorry, guys, it's not.
I
can chuckle
worked
about
really
it, but,
hard on that one.
Yeah, and have you ever been able to accomplish it? And for everybody that is moving things with your mind, you can move something without touching it.
Right. No, I haven't. I worked really hard on it for a while, several years ago, because I decided that it must be possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
My theory on it is that you can do it, but for me, I don't think that I can leave. I think you have to put too much of yourself out there, and I don't do that. Like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so much of your presence has to leave your physical form to go affect another physical form, and I don't leave my body that much.
Yeah.
Like, I'm scared to do it because I'm scared that I won't be able to come back.
I think that's a valid thing to be worried about. Yes.
But I do think it's possible. So if anyone else can do it, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah.
Great.
Ditto. Let us know. Yeah. What about what's your feelings on Ouija boards and things like that?
Things like Ouija boards, I think that my advice would be to not use any form of scrying magic lightly. You should know how to ground, and you should know how to protect yourself, and you should be damn good at it. Because all scrying, all Ouija boards, or using a well or using smoke or whatever your deal is, that's an invitation to connect, and you never know who you're connecting with. You know what I mean? And some of those things that you can connect with will lie to you, and they'll use you, and they can be very detrimental to your life in a lot of ways. And I think that young people get into it a lot. They're just, oh, this is neat, and oh, look, something happened, and oh, look, let's do it more. It's like it's not a game, and you shouldn't treat it like a game.
But do you think someone like you that is obviously you have some extra abilities and you're more sensitive? I've used that word a lot, so I like that you use that word too. Do you think that someone like you, when you use a Ouija board, is much more apt to have activity and contact, or possibly up to, taking it to 0 to 100, but a dangerous contact because you are sensitive?
Well, first of all, I don't do that. Because mostly because I don't have any reason to. I don't want to know anything, and I don't trust because they'll lie to you. I don't trust them. They've lied to me before, and I don't. So you can use a Ouija board and you can get answers to questions, but you won't necessarily gain knowledge or wisdom from it.
And who are they? Who do you think they are that you're talking to on a Ouija board? I mean, not you, you know what I mean? Just whoever is using it.
I don't know. Spirits or demons, or I don't know. But yes, I do, to answer your question, I do think that I could do it successfully.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I would necessarily be at any less chance of having a bad result, a negative result. If anything, maybe even more of a chance, because there's entities out there that are just waiting for you to open that door. To be really cheesy about it, vampires need to be invited into your place. You shouldn't invite them in, these things. Some of them are nice, but so the thing is that the nice ones are going to do what they're going to do, regardless whether you pick up a Ouija board or not.
Right.
I think 99 times out of 100, you're more likely to get something that just wants to mess with you, or something that it's not a good idea. Don't do
Speaking of energy, and you were talking about how when you remote view, a chair that gets used more, or where the kitchen always has a lot of energy, has a lot of activity there. The living room, I totally get that and agree. What about? Do you think it's possible for you to remote view and see what was going on that property in Virginia, or because they are obviously not of this world? If we're, like you said, if we're gonna go on the assumption that they're the Fae. Can you maybe tap into that at all? Or is that not even something that you think would be smart to try?
Both. I think you can, and I think I probably could. But you don't get anything tangible. You know what I mean? You get
Right.
you get your perception of what you're looking at, and they're better at it than I am. And once again, it's kind of an invitation, when you reach out to them. And I don't want them coming here.
No, not when you've got the kids. Yeah, absolutely.
And they will.
Yeah.
And they do. And I don't, so I don't seek out other entities. That's not what I do in my life ever. I don't hunt ghosts, I don't do any of that because I don't need to. I guess people want answers, and I understand that. But if you can accept that there's things that exist that you don't understand and be okay with it, don't go after them. Don't, you don't know. I don't know. You don't know what you're getting into.
Yeah,
I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that like I know better than you because I have experience and you don't understand this. I'm saying nobody really knows what you're necessarily getting into. Even like the best spiritualists, and if you look at it, like we brought up, my mom would never do that. None of the good teachers that I've ever had in my life would ever do it. No Buddhist would ever do it, would ever go looking for these things. Because it doesn't profit you at all to do that. And it can hurt you. And it can hurt you in ways that you don't know or don't understand. I see people, because the other side of living in that world is that people do come in contact with creatures, beings, whatever, from other dimensions. They come in contact with ghosts or demons or spirits or whatever, and then sometimes it helps them, and then sometimes they then have to go find a teacher or a shaman or whatever to get rid of what they picked up on that journey.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Do you think
the biggest job of all of these faith healers and crystal workers and energy workers and stuff is fixing people after they screwed it up?
Yeah.
So, and it can affect your physical, like your health and stuff. If your energy is out of balance, it can affect everything about your life.
Yeah, I get the what you shouldn't do. I'm just wondering if you or another remote viewer was interested in, could you or another remote viewer actually possibly see that entity that was behind you that day in the shop, if someone wanted to do such a thing?
Yes, you could see it today. I don't know if you could see it then. I'm sure that there's people that could look into my memory and see it. Mm. But once again, you don't know what you're seeing. Sort of like the thing about the creature in the river, where she was seeing something that was definitely not friendly, and the kids were seeing something that was friendly. You don't know whether what you're perceiving is A, the reality of the nature of the creature, or B, not biased based off of your own mind and your own perceptions and your own thoughts on things,
Right.
I mean, if you want to see a demon with fiery eyes and horns and you go looking for it, I'm sure you can see one. That does not mean that that's the creature that you saw, if that's how you think of things. I mean, so how many Bigfoot things have you read where people are like, it was Bigfoot? You know, like I saw Bigfoot and then everything was Bigfoot from then on. You know, like a freaking tree snaps in the woods and it's Bigfoot.
Oh,
I've
been in the presence of people like that. Believe me, I know. Yeah. So
it's kind of like that. Like once you've already built up this whatever's in your mind, and then you go look at something that you don't understand to begin with, how much of what you may be seeing is affected by what's already in your head that has nothing necessarily to do with what you're looking at. You know?
Right. So
because it's not like you're taking a Polaroid.
Yeah, well, if we had those, then all this would be null and void, and we'd have Sasquatch and fairies and everything else, right? Even then, though, it comes into question. Besides the crystal that was found, that you can't really explain, I know that was a different situation, but did you ever find any physical evidence on the property that there was this other element out there living amongst you in the woods?
No. There were times there was nothing physical like that.
Okay.
There was, like I said, there were times that sometimes you'd feel scared or sometimes you'd feel welcome. And there was a one piece that I was, as a kid, I liked to believe was a fairy ring. Whether it was or not, I don't know. And it was near where our house was, there was a ring of May-apples in the woods. And all the way around it, the trees were bent down, like not every tree, but like 3 or 4, like in all the directions, there'd be a tree that was just bent over. And when I saw this as a kid, I said, well, that's the fairy ring, and those are the doors. And I wouldn't walk through them, of course, because,
right.
I didn't want to be Rip Van Winkle.
Yeah.
But
and no one can hear you scream.
But, is that what that was? Who knows? Probably not.
Right.
Probably just May-apples in the woods.
Oh, I wasn't expecting the remote viewing stuff and all that. I that is another one of my favorite subjects is remote viewing. I find it highly fascinating. And I know that most people can, heck, I even have DVDs right here. They're Colonel's, it's a remote viewing course. Major Ed Dames, U.S. Army retired. He does a course on remote viewing, and I know that most people can tap into it, but for some it's a much longer, harder, and you have to be a much more dedicated person to get there. So I find that fascinating. So thanks for going through that with me. I appreciate sharing that.
What do you think, like, if other people are doing remote viewing and they're looking at you? Isn't that creepy?
Oh, I mean, I don't know, maybe because I would probably want to do some kind of a strange test and, write a number on a piece of paper or however that works. And I'm like, okay, what am I? Yeah, exactly. What finger am I holding up? And it's not the number 1, right? Like something like that.
So with me growing up, there were people that could tell you what you were thinking right then. Mm-hmm. Or could answer like, the answer is no. I didn't ask the question. Yes, you did.
I think you did.
Or would know, like, where you'd been,
right.
But they hadn't,
Right.
Growing up around it was always kind of like this invasion of my privacy. Like, I never felt like I.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Like even things that, like, like you don't feel like you can do anything wrong, but beyond that, like,
yeah.
Like, I'm in the bathroom. Stop looking at me through.
Oh, yeah, or even just as a kid, this would be handy because you could, like, totally remote view what your parents were wrapping for Christmas. I mean, busted, right? So, I mean, it's making light of it.
Presumably.
But I find it so fascinating. Or maybe it's more you're viewing what your parent was thinking about at the time. Or, oh, my kid is going to love this G.I. Joe or whatever the heck it was.
You can't see my parents that way because I don't think you could probably really see either one of them. You'd have to catch them really off guard. They're too good at it.
But if they weren't, though,
if they weren't, you could.
No.
But most of the people that practice any of that stuff or have a normal, if not daily, ritual of grounding themselves and stuff, it's very hard to tap into them. And some of those people who are less, harm none, you don't want to.
Yeah.
There are people out there that if they feel you looking at them or they feel you trying to read their mind, will mess you up spiritually and psychologically with their own, because they don't like to be invaded. So you should be careful with that. But usually, like I never saw, like, as a kid, I never even got flashes of my parents. They were better than I was. I don't think I ever really like, wonder what we're having for Christmas. It doesn't really work like that anyway, but like, you don't go after anyone that knows more about it than you do. It's not a good idea.
Yeah, get the old cattle prod, the mental cattle prod, right? Like I told you.
Right.
Don't mess with me. Got the space fence up. Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, Bear, thank you so much for sharing all that. That was unexpected and wonderful. Thank you. I hope that other people will write in. I do feel like, or call in, whatever they want to do, and come on and talk about this kind of a thing. I do feel like when I do shows like this, and a lot of times when there's other nuggets that get added on, and we do go off on a tangent, excuse me, that's when I get the most feedback. Like I said, I got a ton from Pam's, and I hope that I get some from yours, and I will make sure to forward you anything that I get in relation to this, because, I always say that there's certain experiences that you don't want, and I would have to say that your experience on that creepy land, at the creepy shop, that would be very terrifying. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but at the very end of your initial email, you said that this happened, and I have rarely been in as much danger as I knew I was in that night. So that's a pretty striking statement.
There was one other time I was in a lot of danger, and it's only been twice in my life. I didn't know what it was going to do that night, but it wasn't good. I knew I was in trouble.
Well, I think you made the right choice by not engaging it or saying, yes, I would love help, thank you.
Oh my goodness, I can't even imagine. Never take them up on it. It's just, like I said, it's not like you can turn around and give them a 20 in return,
Yeah. They don't really need that. Can't use it.
Never accept help that you didn't solicit.
Yeah.
From anything that you don't understand.
I wonder how old, if I know that time is a very fickle thing, and we have very little grasp on what time is and how ancient something might be, but sometimes I wonder how ancient some of these entities are, right? If it's the Fae or whatever, if they have any concept of time, or if they are in fact, quote unquote, born, or they die, or if they even know what die means.
Right. Yeah, well, if they do, then I would imagine that for a being that is so obviously physiologically different from us, and that concept of death has got to be way different than ours.
Right.
It doesn't have to be, but
yeah.
But it would make sense for, because, it's basically a transference of energy. Well, their energy is so different from ours. How does it transfer, and where does it transfer to, and why? So,
yeah, that's the big question.
Yeah, I'd love.
Is why? Why was
I'd
it
love
asking
to hear more about the Fae, and in particular, if anyone else can see them, that would be neat.
Yes.
Because obviously Pam can't be the only one.
No.
I do agree with you, though. I feel for her. I wouldn't want to go around seeing demons hanging out of people's backs and weird creatures beyond the ones you already, there's enough going on in the woods. Like I've been in the woods a lot of my life, and this is probably the other thing that frustrates me with people when they act like they know everything. And I'm like, anybody who's spent any amount of time in the woods and not even on the subject of fairies or any other cryptid. But anybody that's spent any amount of time in the woods will tell you that you don't know anything about the woods.
Yeah.
You know, that we see very little what's going on, and that the woods will always surprise you. There's always something new to learn. You know, so this security that people find in assuming that we know it all is really silly to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, Bear, thank you so much for sharing all that with me. I will, like I said, I'll forward you any information. Hopefully other folks will come forward and talk about this. I know, hey, a lot of people have land in the woods or cabins in the woods, or they went to a creepy place and stayed for a weekend and had some weird stuff happen. Get in contact, and that way we can get more information out there and start to share some of these creepy wood stories. Are just, it makes me miss the woods a lot because I'm back in the desert, as you know. So I really enjoyed being in the woods. I always felt really happy there and at peace, but it's not always a peaceful place. So gotta watch your step, especially when someone you can see cannot hear you. I don't know what's going on there, but I've been hearing more and more of this as of late.
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of weird things like that. That it's definitely odd.
Hey, thank you so much.
Thank you. All right.
All right, bye.
Bye.